Greetings friends, I am back again. This time I am going to speak to you on disaster management planning with emphasis on vulnerability, hazard, risk, resource analysis and control measures. In fact, this aspect of my lecture is going to be of great importance to you because without planning nothing can be achieved. Intention. The main purpose of this lesson is to formulate a policy for counter disaster plans. The aim of this policy planning is to anticipate future problems due to a particular type of disaster and prepare a plan to counter the effects so as to minimize the magnitude of disaster. In other words, to put it in a nutshell, what we are trying to say is you should prepare a plan to meet any exigency that may occur in your area. Before we start preparing any counter disaster plan, we have to refer to Vulnerability Atlas, a booklet published by the Government of India, and know the types of disasters that are likely to occur in a given area. This is known as disaster specific for preparation of any plan. Needless to point out that every disaster has its own magnitude and effect, and to counter this we need to have specific plans for every disaster as well as know the critical areas of damage. To elucidate this same thing that I have just now given to you, for example, what do you mean by disaster specific? You may have an area where there is hell of a lot of earthquake disaster. Another area may be prone to cyclones. A third one may be prone to floods. But you can't say all of them can be prepared and I will be prepared for all three. First and foremost, your Vulnerability Atlas gives you some idea, specific idea, what type of effect is going to be there in case a particular type of disaster which is likely to happen in your area, and from that you say, okay, now I know what type of disaster. That is known as disaster specific. In other words, though 40% of various effects are similar in most of them, the rest of the 60% require different type of training, different type of planning, different type of equipment, different type of skills. It is for this reason that we should know which area are critical from which particular damage that is likely to occur in case of a particular disaster. Now to go further in this, the other aspect of any disaster planning is that we should not only be prepared for specific disaster but also encompass the scope of other aspects in disaster cycle which have been enumerated to you earlier. In other words, just to give you in short, earlier I have talked to you about preparedness, disaster, the social aspects of it, and training and awareness. In other words, we want to bring in to you what this planning is and where does it fit in these aspects. So that is very, very important, failing which you will not be having the community participating in your activity. That is why it is important for us to know the place in disaster cycle where exactly our planning is fitting in. Now for example, I just now talked to you about intention, but next aspect of thing is aspects of planning. What do you mean by aspects of planning? Let us see in detail what exactly we mean by that. Any plan prepared should take into consideration not only specific aspects of a disaster but also know the problems that are likely to be created. This helps us to find solutions. In other words, in preparation of various teams required for managing a disaster. Now you will say, what do you mean teams? What do you mean problems? For example, anybody who will say, if I know a problem, I will find a solution. There you are. If you know the problem, you are finding a solution. That is exactly what is required in disaster management too. When we are talking of a plan, I would like to know what problems I am likely to face. In case I know the problems well in advance, I can then prepare for it. What will I be preparing? I will be preparing teams. Teams for what? For mitigating the problems. So that is what we mean by this. Let us now take the next aspect. A few of the major problems that will occur due to any disasters are loss of life. As I have told you earlier, disaster is a situation wherein huge amount of loss of life has occurred, and because of this large number of people are dead, large number of people are injured, etc. But more important, loss of life is of great in number. Then we have large number of people getting injured. Large number of people getting injured. What is this and the first one got to do with each other? For example, we have got to think in terms of removing dead bodies in the first case, trapped persons in the second case, and then treating them in the third case. So these are the different aspects that are got to be thought when I am talking to you about any particular thing, when I am talking of large number of people getting injured or loss of life. Then I come to damage to property. Why should it be necessary? For example, property can be divided into two aspects. One is private, the other one is public. Private is your own dwelling houses, etc. Whereas I am talking to you about public, it may be schools, it may be hospitals, it may be dams, it may be a flyover, it may be a road, anything, it may be an industry. So this is what exactly we are talking in damage to property. Then we say change of lifestyle. Change of lifestyle, I must give you an example, otherwise you will not understand what exactly is change of life. For example, in the Gujarat earthquake that took place, a person was sitting in his living room and taking a cup of tea which his wife handed over with love and affection at 7:50 in the morning. But around about 8 o'clock, he was standing in the main road with whatever dress he was wearing, and he did not know where is his wife, where are his children, where are his parents, and where is his house, which is most important. Now at that particular thing, you can't be thinking, where is my wife and where is my cup of tea? There has been a change in your lifestyle, and there is a lot to discuss about change in lifestyle. Then we come to another very important aspect, loss of livelihood. You may say, what is that in loss of livelihood? Let us say you are working in an industry. If the industry is destroyed, where is your livelihood? Similarly, let us say you are a person who is working in a farm, and if your farm is completely destroyed due to earthquake or floods, and it is no more good enough for you to work, how can you do any farming? How can you do any industrial work if the industry is not there? That is known as loss of livelihood. Then essential services are disrupted. What is essential services? Your water supply is gone, your electricity is gone, your sewage system is disrupted, telephone services are not functional. In other words, whatever we are depending for making our life better in our day-to-day life has been affected. And when you say that this has been affected, it is the essential service which is disrupted. That in turn causes a lot of disruption. So that is exactly what it is. Then we say system loss. This is very important for us to understand. System loss is a subject which is most of us do not understand. For example, after disaster, large number of us say, what the hell is government doing? Why are they not attended? Where are all those people in the government who are supposed to be working? The persons who are supposed to be working are also human beings, don't forget that. There are also people who are living in the same community that you are. If your persons have lost their life, maybe the persons who are working in essential services, etc., have also lost their life. Maybe they have also become injured. Maybe they have also maimed. In other words, the persons who are supposed to take your orders and carry on the job and to ensure that this job is completed is not there. In other words, we are used to taking orders from our superiors, passing it on to our next subordinates, and they in turn passing it on to next, and data collected or results oriented, comes to you and you in turn will say, okay, this has been done. But that system which we have created for smooth functioning has been disrupted. That is exactly what we mean by system loss. So this should be understood by us. No point in telling, oh, where is the government? If the government itself has been completely shattered, the question shattered means not because the government is not wanting to work. The government has lost its employees. The government has lost its belongings. The government also has lost large amount of belongings which is supposed to help them in carrying out various works. We now come to the next aspect, social and psychological disorders. You may say, what is social and psychological disasters got to do with this? What you don't understand is a person, life change, style change and social thing. You must link it up. In other words, few minutes ago he was in his building, now he is standing in a line, maybe even for a cup of tea, and who knows where he is going to stay, maybe in a tent, maybe in a basha, maybe somewhere else in a temporary building. What is his toilet system? What is his food system? In other words, socially you are encompassed with certain aspects which you are not used to. Psychological disorders. Human beings, we are normal people, but under stress we become persons who do certain things that are not logical. Now that is known as a psychological disorder. When you do something which is not logical, and when you do something which is illogical, and anger comes in or something else happens, this is known as psychological disorder. Can we say they are mad? Certainly not. They are not mad. But they are people who have been sort of engulfed by a situation wherein the stress has made them, either they have withdrawn, or they have become emotional, or they have become silent, or they have started doing things which is not normal for a human being. So these aspects should be understood, and we should look into it and see how best we can do it. This is what is known as aspects of planning. In other words, I also have to think in terms of psychological disorders, because there is change of livelihood, loss of life, etc. So I have got to think in how to remove this stress. Now I come to another point: animals dead and critical and wounded. Now you will say, sir, come on, we are talking in terms of disaster and talking about human beings, suddenly you have gone into animals. Fine, but what you don't understand, carcasses of animal which are lying here and there after 2 to 3 days can create a lot of problems for you, hygiene sanitation problems, and these animals which are not removed can become dangerous. You can get various types of diseases. In other words, you will be requiring services to remove these animals. Point I am trying to make is, no point in trying to think only in terms of human beings. A disaster also affects animals, and these animals which are dead, critical and wounded also require your help and assistance, without which, in fact, without naming the particular disaster that took place, I can very well tell you that in one of the earthquake situations in India, there was a chock-a-block situation, and wherein these animals dead, etc., were not being removed for 3 days. So after 3 days we had to think in terms of bringing a service for removing these bodies. In other words, earlier we had not thought of that. So that is what means lack of planning. So the animals dead, critical and wounded, etc., are also playing a very important role as far as this is concerned. Then we come to the next: mitigating teams. In order to meet the above situation which I have just created, told you about various problems, you need certain specific services which help us in countering the problems that have been created, as well as be prepared to meet the emergent situation. These services required will be what? Rescue team. You will say, what is a rescue team? A rescue team is a team which gets into action for removing trapped persons. What do you mean by trapped persons? Building has fallen down, they have collapsed, and people are trapped inside that. I have to get into such situations. You must have seen in large number of television details how this is being done. In fact, to give you a small little example, recently in our television, as my lecture is being given to you, for last 19 days in Meghalaya, they are trying to remove some mine workers who are inside a rat hole, as they call it, where illegal mining was taking place. Now for that you require certain type of equipment, certain type of manpower, certain type of diving things. Now that is known as a rescue team, a team which gets into action for removing people who are trapped. Firefighting. You will say, oh, firefighting, I know all about it because there is a fire service. Fine. But that fire service is meant for a peacetime activity. In other words, during peacetime, the firefighters are likely to face a situation wherein we are going to find a situation of firefighting which requires certain type of activity. Now that firefighting is what they are going to do. But as my lecture progresses, I am going to tell you where exactly people like you and me fit in. In fact, a thing which is worthwhile telling you at this stage, which I will be later on also telling you, is that in the Twin Tower fire building collapse that took place in America, do you know that 60% of the firefighting persons who died, they were volunteers? Volunteers, not professional firefighters, but they were volunteers who had become professional firefighters. So point I am trying to tell you is, we make up the situation of firefighting because totally depending on firefighters to fight this situation from peacetime to disaster is going to be a big disaster. We got to augment their services. We got to think in terms of how exactly we are going to do this. So that I will be explaining to you a little later on, but at this stage it is enough for you to know that firefighting is a job not only for firefighters but for each one of us. So we got to learn this technique. Then we will talk in terms of Then we talk in terms of the next thing, that is casualty service. Now you will say casualty service, oh, I know all about it. What do you know all about it? First thing, for example, I will say first aid. What do you know about first aid? You will say what? Lifting a person. No, sir. In India, when we talk in terms of first aid, we say how fast we can take a person from place A to place B. My intention is not taking a person from place A to place B in a fast manner. Because if you take him in a fast manner, the easiest thing is known as potato sack rescue. What is a potato sack rescue? Catch hold of his 2 hands and 2 legs and then take him away. But in case he had a rib fracture or his vertebra is broken, what is the thing that has happened to you? The first thing that has happened to you is that you find that by lifting him in this particular manner, you have completely destroyed his revival. In other words, he has become maimed for life. And people will say, no, he became a casualty because of that earthquake, because of that cyclone, because of tsunami. No, sir. He became a casualty because of you handling him in a different manner. So first aid. What is first aid? I must be able to give artificial respiration. I should be able to stop movement of limbs which are broken. I must be able to give the first aid for transporting a person from place A to place B, keeping in mind the type of damage that has taken place in his body. In other words, whether I have a stretcher or I don't have a stretcher. Do you know, for example, I am sure you are sitting in a chair and listening to my lecture. If 20 of you are sitting and if one of you suddenly collapses, how will you carry him? You will say, bring a stretcher. If I was with you as one of the 20 persons, I will not say bring a stretcher. I will lift him in what is known as a clothes lift. What is a clothes lift? 6 of us out of the 20 lifting him by holding different positions of his pant and shirt and taking him in a vertical, horizontal manner from the ground so that his injury does not get aggravated. That is first aid. And then we come to the next, first aid post. Oh, first aid post, what is this all about? We are all very familiar about people going to hospitals. Government hospitals, especially when they go there, you find large amount of people standing there. What will happen when there is a disaster? Even larger number of people will be there. So what we want to do is we want to screen them at the spot and say 50% of them require some amount of treatment and then they can be sent home. Another 30% of them have got to be sent to hospital. 30% of them remaining will require continuous treatment, so they have to go now and then and get certain amount of treatment and coming back. That is where a doctor is there and it looks into it. That is the first aid post. Then we say ambulance. All of you, I am sure, will say, oh, we know all about ambulance. But I will say you don't know anything about ambulance. What do you mean by you don't know anything about ambulance? Ambulance is an item which can really save life. In fact, if you go by the WHO record, nearly 80% of the ambulances that are there in India as such today, they are not fit to be called as ambulances. They are only fit to be called as transportation vehicles. These transportation vehicles are being treated as ambulances for the simple reason that we are taking them from place A to place B. But my point is, if during peacetime you are taking an ambulance and you are calling it an ambulance because you are taking a casualty from place A to place B, why take them in a Suzuki van or some other van where only 4 people can go or 2 people can go? Take a 3-ton truck, put some Dexian angles on all 3 sides, put about 4 to 6 people on one side, 4 to 6 people on the other side, another 4 people on the front side. You have got about 12 persons going, and in between in the center, what we call as the walking wounded, about 10 of them can be made to sit there. In other words, I can send 20 casualties in an ambulance during a disaster instead of sending only 1. That is known as disaster response. I want you to understand what exactly is disaster response. Don't say ambulance. Ambulance is what? Carrying patient, but how? That is the important thing. Then we come to training. Now I am talking to you. I am giving you certain examples. Now I am creating awareness. But this awareness is for what purpose? The awareness is for the purpose that I want you to understand how exactly these things are done. But that is not enough. I am given to understand about 1,000 of you are listening to these lectures all over India. Out of 1,000 of you, if 200 people decide we are going to do something, let's say you become first aiders, let us say you become rescue team, members, or you become a peripheral member of a rescue team, which is called a self-help party. By doing that, you require certain amount of training, because skill is the thing that matters. Without skill, you cannot have a team, and that team is useless to me if you don't have skill. In other words, large number of people who will come and say, I will want to do this, I want to do this. Disaster training is not Yuddha Kale Shastrabhyasa. Disaster training is training in peacetime, training before disaster, and employing them during disaster. So remember, training is an important aspect. Communication, hell of an important subject. We want to communicate not only from outside information. For example, communication service is the service which gives you warning in advance, which tells you, look, so and so thing is going to happen. You got to try to see that this particular thing is done. For example, let us say an earthquake takes place, and you are in area A, which I talked to you when I talked to you about vulnerability. That means complete destruction. Can I leave you there? But if I am giving you an warning in advance, area A has to be evacuated. How did this evacuation take place? Because of the warning being given by the communication service. Communication service in turn contacted rescue team, in turn contacted firefighting, in turn contacted casualty, and they in turn contacted back to control rooms of the communication service, which I will explain to you when I talk of emergency operation centers, wherein I will tell you something in detail about communication service. But at this stage, this is enough. Then we want to know something about supply service. What is supply service? We require food, we require clothing, we require equipment. How are we going to go and do this? The government agencies should look into this. They should also cultivate the habit of talking to NGOs and see what amount of help and assistance we can get from them. In other words, a service which is meant for A, looking after the welfare of all the response teams and their requirement, B, look after the people who are injured, who are dead, who are to be evacuated, etc., etc. That is what we mean by supply service, welfare service. Needless to say, the name itself tells you what is it all about. Welfare service is a service which takes into account what? How am I going to do this business of evacuation of people? How am I going to do their camping? How am I going to give them food? How am I going to give them clothing? How am I going to look after them? How am I going to cook food? What are the aspects of this which I talked to you when I gave you the lecture on rationings, etc., and camps, etc. In other words, welfare service, as the name suggests, is a service which is organized for what purpose? For the purposes of ensuring welfare. For what? So that morale of the persons who are hit by this situation rises up a bit. I am not saying they become fun and welfare people who are doing the job, or people who are creating a beautiful area of making them feel happy. No, sir. But I am making them say that they may not be happy, but I don't want them to be unhappy. In other words, I am trying to see how best they can meet with this situation. Then we talk of corpse disposal. Oh, you say, I have attended so many corpses and we have disposed them on various ghats in the city of mine. That you did for one body, two bodies. But when I give you 100 bodies, 200 bodies, and worst thing about corpse disposal, which you do not know at all, sometimes I'll get only hands, sometimes I'll get only legs, sometimes I cannot recognize the body because the entire skin is gone, only muscles are remaining. Now these are known as mutilated bodies or decomposed bodies. When you have a mutilated body or a decomposed body, the point that you have to remember is identification. Identification of corpses which are there in front of you is in itself a big task. Why? Because even disposal requires us to know how best we can dispose of them as far as their religious requirements. If, for example, I do not know till the end, then of course I can do what is known as community disposal. But till such time that I can find out and do the needful, I will try to see that their religious requirements are also met. But one more important thing I must tell you. If, for example, you are a rescue person or a first aider and you get a dead body or injured person who is got badly injured, don't try to handle him with your naked hands. And don't be walking around in that area without shoes. Because if you got any injury in your hands or legs, And if the person concerned or the corpse that is there for last 3 days or 4 days, what we call as the dead or disposed body which is required to be disposed of, you may find that you will get into a dangerous situation known as gangrene, and you will have to be operated for that, and you may lose your own limb. So be careful when you are talking in terms of dead bodies. It is not as easy as you thought. Identification and proper disposal by putting on gloves. You will say, where will I get gloves? Don't get gloves. Take old saris, old dhotis, etc., cut them into pieces, tie them on your hand and leave some free space for your hand to move like this, and there you have got a gloves and you can handle it very well. Then law and order, traffic, without meaning any bad thing for any one of the services that happened in one of our earthquake situations. In a particular situation in one of the states, for 3 days, I said a little earlier, chock-a-block situation occurred. What do you mean by chock-a-block situation? People going in and going out were all engulfed in one particular area, and they were not able to move up or down. And then we had to send traffic policemen for managing the situation. So this is where things come in, and we say, okay, this is, in other words, I have given you certain aspects from law and order to rescue to firefighting to casualty to communication, supply, welfare services, to make you understand that this is a work of large number of people from different type of disciplines, and this is known as what? Aspects of planning. In this, I must tell you, the enumeration of services required to help during a disaster should give you an insight to 2 aspects of disasters, namely, disaster is a multidisciplinary activity. Now, what exactly do you mean by multidisciplinary activity? I told you that a little while ago, there are so many things that have happened. A rescue team is there, a firefighting team is there, a first aid team is there, an ambulance is there, a communication system is there, and what not and what not. You got a welfare situation, etc., corpse disposal. In other words, different type of people are working from different disciplines. No one discipline can say, I have done disaster management. Firefighters cannot say, I have done disaster management. Rescuers cannot say, I have done disaster management. First aiders cannot say, I have done disaster management. Communication cannot say, I have done disaster management. Lastly, involvement of community in any plan that is prepared should be an essential requirement, since it deals with the problem, their problem and comfort. In other words, multidisciplinary activity also involves your own community. Don't forget this. The community is an important aspect of all activities of disaster management, which is known as the multidisciplinary activity. In other words, so far I have discussed with you intention, aspects of planning. Now I will get into another zone known as resource mobilization. What exactly is resource mobilization and how do we go about it is what I will have to discuss with you now. In dealing with any disaster, we have to mobilize large amount of resources, and it's a major task in itself, since resources are not available at one place and they have to be pulled in, which means it's a major peacetime activity in itself, which can describe the resources location as follows: local resource, district resource, state resource, national resource, industrial and private resource. With all these things in background, I must also tell you one more thing which has to bring to your notice when I am talking of resource mobilization. Disasters occur in 3 different areas. One is known as an urban disaster. The other one is known as a rural disaster. The third one is known as a remote area disaster. In other words, from these you can come to know how exactly all these resources are going to be useful to us. So let us see one by one what exactly we mean. Local resource means official as well as your other resources within your own area of disaster. District resource coming from other areas around your city or this thing. State resource is coming from the state, from all over the state. Then national resource is coming from the government at the center. Industry and private resource, in other words, private industries and various other industries which have got their own resources, how exactly they are going to manage and how they are going to put up. This is known as private resource or industrial resource. We shall now see the next aspect. In resource mobilization, availability and mobilization of resources in one aspect of its deployment, which brings us to the next important aspect, that is time frame management, which will be discussed a little later on in detail. What exactly we mean by time frame management at detail I will tell you later on, but at this stage what you should know is, from local resource to national resource, the moment a disaster has taken place, A to D cannot be done in minutes. A will take its own time, B will take its own time, C will take its own time, D will take its own time. In other words, there is a time loss in deployment of all these. I will be going into this detail, but why I have mentioned this here is, till all these services are on the spot, you are the person who is holding the sack in the situation at a given place. In other words, the problem is yours. So you have to manage, and that management is known as time frame. So we will be discussing with you in detail some of these aspects when we talk in terms of time frame management. Now we come to the next aspect, warning. That means from resource mobilization we come to warning. How exactly we do going about this, and what exactly we mean by warning. In order to warn public of an impending danger, warning will have to be given to them in advance, so that actions could be taken to save their life and property. But the major aspect to be remembered is that warning needs to be standardized and issued in time. It is needless to emphasize that warning and its nature, oblique implication, should be known to the people at large, failing which the utility of warning will be defeated. Let us take few examples. I am going to now give you a warning which is normally given by the meteorological department and our television, radio, etc. Listen to this warning, especially in coastal areas. The warning is something like this: gale wind with the speed of 150 kilometers is likely to strike the Visakhapatnam port, and all public are warned to ensure that necessary actions are taken so that their life and property can be saved. Now the question that I want to ask you is, what have you understood from this warning? You have understood this, that a gale wind of 150 kilometers is going to strike, fine. It is going to strike port of Visakhapatnam, that is fine. And you also understood it is going to create damage, that is fine. But what type of damage? You will say, why is this necessary, sir? In a cyclonic area, in other words, where ocean is there, beaches are there, sea is there, you will have always a cyclone warning being given now and then. For every warning that is given, if people start moving away from their area, during a particular period they will not be in their houses at all. That is not correct. In other words, you got to tell them what is going to take place. In other words, I should be specific. Don't give a technical jargon. Mention that standardizing what? You got to tell 150 kilometers gale wind is going to do this to an electric pole, is going to do this to a telephone pole, is going to do this to an animal, is going to do this to a house of yours. In other words, public should get to know that this type of activity is likely to take place in the next 3 hours, so that they are prepared for it. That is what we mean by implementation, rather than giving a warning and forgetting about it. Giving a warning and implementation is the next part of it. This part of standardizing the warning rests with officials functioning under government. That means people who are giving the warning, whereas its implementation and actions to be taken by public will have to be done by community members who are called as wardens. Now a new word I have introduced, warden. What do you mean by wardens? A representative from amongst the people who has been trained in various aspects and who has come to know how exactly this is going to take place. And he in turn tells you what the officials want him to tell you, and also he is responsible for telling the officials what the people want them to tell. That means this is the difficulty that is going to face. That is a warden. Warden happens to be a local person with nationalistic aspirations and ready to devote some time for public service. For selection of such persons from the society is a task by itself. But the community of teachers are the best suited for this purpose. Needless to mention, they are the ones well suited for this activity. The only aspect remaining is that such wardens need to be trained in all aspect of its warning. From awareness, we have to go into training for these wardens. Otherwise, they will not be themselves knowing what exactly is to be done. Its implementation and actions to be taken thereafter, so that they can in turn successfully implement the same in the community. In other words, you may say, in the various teams that you discussed, you did not discuss warden, but now you are telling about a warden. The reason I removed that from that place is These other services are planned for working during a disaster. A warden is a person who is working before disaster, during disaster, after disaster. In other words, a person who is there in all three spheres. So selecting them, training them, giving them the necessary equipment and giving them ideas as to how exactly they are going to implement. For this, friends, is a big task. But I can tell you one thing, in my experience of last 40 years in this subject, I have come across minimum 2,000 such people who are ready to work. They are doctors, they are lawyers, they are teachers, but they are ready to give their life for working in the sphere of what we call activity of known as wardens. So all that you have to do is keep your eyes and ears open, see who are the people who are meant for social service, who are meant for doing this job, and select such persons so that you can get them to do the work. So we come to the next aspect of from warning, we come to what is known as coordination. Let us now see what exactly is coordination. Coordination is, since disaster management is a multidisciplinary activity, one of the most important tasks in plan preparation is one of coordination with various services, agencies, in order to sensitize them. Important is sensitize them, inputs to provide their agencies to the local authorities. This coordination is an essential aspect of disaster planning. For example, let us take a situation. I am giving you this example to make you understand what exactly is coordination. Essential part of disaster planning. For example, let us take a situation of looking into a hospital plan and see how exactly it works. Every hospital has a bed strength which is occupied by. Bed strength means what? A hospital has got 200 beds, it has got 300 beds, it has got 100 beds. That's what it means. It is consisting of whom? A. Serious patients. B. Patients who are undergoing recovery. Patients who need further treatment. D. Patients who need examination and who need medical intervention. These are the type of people who are there. Now what exactly you mean by coordination? In our coordination with the civil surgeon of the locality, because civil surgeon is the important person for doing this job. Locality, we can reduce the bed strength of hospital by discharging some of the patients. Few others who require assistance can be transported to distant hospital for ongoing treatment. Along with this, we can help in hospital in increasing the bed strength by carrying out improvisation so as to increase the bed strength. In other words, giving places like verandas, this, that, etc., and making bed space available. The idea of this coordination is that large number of disaster casualties which can be easily sent across to various local hospitals in times of needs. The coordination helps in local hospitals preparing itself to take disaster casualties and authorities at the site to know which are the hospitals wherein they can send their casualty. Now the last sentence has got a great meaning, wherein they can send their casualty. This, you see what happens when you send a casualty, you can't be sending them all of them to the government hospital. A city has got large number of hospitals. But other than the government hospital, the other ones are private hospitals. But during disaster, they got to pool in their resources. But one major problem comes in. Some of them may be gynec problems for hospitals, some of them may be orthopedic problems, some of them may be abdominal problems, some of them may be for neurological problem. In other words, you should know which of the private hospitals is meant for doing what type of job. Why is this necessary? When we send casualties, we got to mark what we call as triage. That is a totally different subject which is very, very big. In hospital management, we got to talk to you about this, but at this stage I will only give you this idea that when we send casualties in an ambulance, we mark cards with them and say this casualty is going to have so and so problem and he needs to be treated. In other words, as a doctor, I have already specified what type of training he requires, what type of treatment he requires. So he has to be taken to so and so hospital. Why this is necessary? In disaster management, without this coordination, we have had situations wherein we have taken people to different hospitals where they are not required to be taken. With the result, they had to be shifted. And this shifting and bringing and then treating has caused some problem, and many a times it has created a law and order problem. So avoid all that things. Can send their casualties to the required hospitals is the thing that is to be known, and that is where coordination is required. Similarly, industries happen to be economic strength of our nation. And keeping this in mind, it is absolutely essential that they should also prepare their disaster management plans. However, since the state and local authorities are large frames and industry is part of it, there is a requirement of a two-way coordination without which serious problem can arise. And one of the best examples for such a problem in our country is the Bhopal gas tragedy. What I am trying to tell you, my friends, is an industry may be dealing with what? Chemicals. And if that gets into trouble, there may be an on-site problem. On-site problem means where the chemical has created problems for their own people within their area. An off-site problem where the chemicals has created problem for outsiders. Bhopal gas tragedy is one of the best examples of an off-site problem. An off-site problem requires coordination between the industry and the state. And there are enough laws made out these days in disaster management plan, and these laws are very, very important in the sense now today nobody can escape saying that I did not know about it. The question is, you got to know about it. Accountability has been brought in with Disaster Management Act and rules. This is a different subject. Again, this is not going to be discussed in this course of yours, but it is enough for you to know that there is such a subject which is also important. In other words, we are trying to bring in the aspect of accountability in case of industry and state. In other words, persons from the industry and persons from the state authorities, they should coordinate amongst themselves to know what exactly is the situation, how is the industry dealing with it, what type of antidotes are required, and where are they going to be, and how much number of these antidotes are required, how are they going to transport the casualties, what is going to be the wind direction. These things have got to be taken into account when we talk of this. This aspect proves coordination is the only small step in planning, but a giant step for authorities involved in plan preparation. Remember this, small step in planning, a giant step for authorities involved in plan preparation. Without this step, no further successful activity can take place in management of a disaster. So far I have discussed with you intention, aspects of planning, resource mobilization, warning, coordination, which actually means I have given you the disaster planning flow chart from A, B, C, D, E, and how exactly it has gone through. Well, friends, thank you very much for your kind listening, and also I hope you got into the idea how exactly disaster planning works and what are the aspects. We shall take up the next one after a break of few minutes. Okay, thank you very much.